Now, you mentioned the founding fathers weren't ever imagining that the political system would get this divisive and that we'd see so much fighting between the two parties over the Supreme Court. I want to zoom out a little bit and ask you how much about the court is settled law and was determined by the Constitution, and how much more could it change? Because I think the idea of changes to the court, it's a little surprising if you really think about it in the context of history.
Well, it is a little surprising, but maybe it shouldn't be as surprising as we think. So the Constitution says a few things about the Supreme Court. It says some things about its jurisdiction, although it does explicitly give Congress the power to make regulations and exceptions for the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction. And it says that the judges shall hold their office during good behavior, which is understood to mean life tenure. It doesn't say what size the Supreme Court should be. And actually, the Supreme Court has changed in size over the years. It started out at 6. It was increased up to 9. The Republicans made it 10 to give Lincoln an extra appointment. After Lincoln was assassinated, they shrank it. A similar thing happened with Jefferson. Jefferson's opponents tried to deny him appointments by manipulating the size of the court. So it's happened. And actually, some people would say that that's what the Republican Senate did when they refused to consider Merrick Garland. They shrank the size of the court to 8, effectively, and then they brought it back up to 9 to allow Trump to make an appointment. So changing the size of the Supreme Court, it is within Congress's power, and it has been done in the past. Nonetheless, people think that it's the most radical because I think it's the most partisan. It clearly looks partisan. Now, term limits, on the other hand, I've been saying that really is a nonpartisan, good government solution to a problem that we have. Our appointments process for the Supreme Court just doesn't make sense. That, however, is a little more radical constitutionally speaking, because there might be problems with the constitutional provision that says judges shall hold their office during good behavior. So if you said you're a Supreme Court justice for 18 years and then you're not a Supreme Court justice anymore, that would violate the Constitution. And the way that people have tried to get around this is by saying, here's what it means to be a Supreme Court justice. You will sit in regular active service for 18 years, and then after that you will do something else. You will maybe decide cases on the courts of appeals or something like that. And that's what retired Supreme Court justices do now. And the interesting thing about this proposal is that the US Supreme Court has said a judge who takes senior status, which is what the justices do when they retire, is still a judge. They still hold the office. So it seems possible, based on that precedent, to say, well, we're going to move people to a slightly different set of job descriptions, but we're not removing them from the office of judge. And in fact, you still address retired Supreme Court justices as associate justice. According to the Supreme Court, they are still Supreme Court justices. So it seems like technically maybe you could do this without a constitutional amendment, but that's certainly not clear.
That is so interesting. So it is technically legal, but then there are technicalities that you would have to abide by to put those term limits in place.
Yeah, and I think it would ultimately end up in court, and ultimately the Supreme Court would be the one deciding it.
Oh, well, that's
So that's
more
a
meta.
whole different puzzle. Yeah.
That
And
breaks my brain a
what
little
some
bit.
people, well, what some people have suggested is we don't think the Supreme Court's going to like the idea of term limits, so we should package them in a bill. And we say, here's the term limits, and if you invalidate term limits, then 4 seats are immediately added to the Supreme Court. So if you don't let us have term limits, we're going to do expansion.
Oh, wow. That's spicy, for lack of a better word. That really sets up more political fighting.